Glad to touch base again with you. I remember we briefly DM'd maybe 5-6 years ago. So I'm glad I think you got your Twitter back, I guess, and you're back in the space. So glad to see that. I cover everything from movies to geopolitics, pop culture. We've done a lot of debates, all the way back to like the Bloodsport era, back when I think I first saw some of your content. I host Alex Jones Show, fourth hour, most Fridays. More recently, we've done a lot of pretty high-profile stuff with Crowder and that kind of stuff. So, yeah, we're out here just kind of doing all kinds of crazy stuff. And then, I do books on symbolism, film theory. Got a couple books on philosophy, and I write for the Sam Hyde Show.
Excellent. That's a lot of stuff. And you're making me want to reminisce about the 2017 sort of era with the blood sports. But the thing is, we don't need to reminisce because there's so much new stuff going on all the time. And I think this year has been an absolute roller coaster. My previous guests perhaps didn't want to talk about that so much, but I think you're probably more hip to that kind of thing, especially in America. Give me your general thoughts on 2025 in America. And I could mention Shiloh Hendricks, this new girl at, is it Sisabon? I can't remember what it's called. Irina Derutska, Charlie Kirk, Nick Fuentes, all of these things, and the Trump presidency of J.D. Vance. It's a whole cornucopia of things. So what would you say about 2025?
It's an insane roller coaster, acid trip, fever dream. It's been wild, I've been happy and I've been enjoying the ride, I guess is the best way to put it, because as you mentioned, we had a lot of optimism once again. I think with Trump coming in, we had Doge, we had all this kind of stuff going on. That might have been last year. I don't really remember, but there was a lot of fervor, very similar to the way things were looking 2016, 2017, right? We had that period where there was a lot of optimism about Trump. There was a lot of, resurgence of the right wing, dissident right, et cetera. And I think a lot of the Biden coof era sort of dispelled that. And then we got this resurgence of the right, Elon having Twitter, all that stuff, freed up a lot of things, but also there was a lot of just crap that happened as well. The hyping up of the racial tensions with these high profile murders and attacks. I'm not saying it was intentional. I'm saying that when you bring in all of these people, the Somalians, the Muslims, the Muslim Brotherhood, when you let thugs out of jail like that dude that killed Irina, you've got just chaos. I don't know what to say about the U.S. other than it's chaos. Trump has been, a mixed bag, as I guess probably everybody expected, who has some political sense, geopolitical sense. I know I'm kind of rambling, but it's hard to. You got all these.
It's fine. You're giving a general impression, and of course, it has been a messy year.
Yeah,
there's so much to say.
A couple highlights and a couple fails. Okay, so the good points are that we're beginning to see a resurgence once again of dissident right attitudes and opinions. We see that with the popularity of Nick Fuentes. We see that with the boomer mind matrix beginning to collapse. This is not just with Piers Morgan, who clearly lost the debate with Fuentes, but this is the boomer mind matrix and boomer hold is beginning to collapse. That's something I've been harping on for a long time. So that's a positive thing. People beginning to wake up to mass Islamic importation in America, which is a new thing. So, I think I always say that we're like 10, 20 years behind you guys in the UK because it's the same plan of destroying the West intentionally, I believe, through these sort of open border strategies. So those are some of the good things happening. The bad things, Trump completely failed with the Epstein stuff, massive fail. Trump's lately kind of been, disappointing a lot of people with Zelensky, his Zelensky stances and flip-flopping on that. Doge being a big fail, starting out good but failing. So, that's a couple pros and cons that come to mind for 2025.
Yeah, I'll pick up on a few of those things. About Islam in America, that absolutely used to be something that even just a few years ago, when someone in Europe would try to convey the situation to someone in America, there would be a bafflement. They wouldn't understand what we were talking about,
Right.
because in America there was always Dearborn, Michigan, for some reason. There was always Dearborn, but the rest of the country just seemed to have no experience of mass Muslim immigration.
Right.
And then suddenly this seemed to change a few years ago, and with not just Muslims but also Indians.
Right.
I was talking to a friend the other day, and I said America's experience of Indians up until very recently, it was the scientist in Short Circuit. I think he was supposed to be Indian, and Apu from The Simpsons. And other
Exactly.
than that, there just didn't seem to be any recognition of this entire ethnic group in America, presumably because they were there in tiny numbers. And then suddenly everyone is moaning about Indians in America, in Canada, and in Australia, and in Europe. But let's not get into the Indian thing. Islam is a specific threat. And I think Americans were completely insulated from it until very recently. So what would you say about that?
Yeah, great point. And I can tell you from my own vantage point that I had a lot of ignorance about Islam going back to, say, 2015, 2016. I mean, I was always very critical of mainline stories about, say, 9/11 or, big high profile events. So I had a lot of criticism and doubt about the establishment narratives. And I think that kind of put me in a position of kind of ambiguity and, as I said, ignorance, because I didn't really know what Islam taught. I'd not really interacted with a lot of Muslims. And like you said, a lot of people in America, it's just not something that, for a long time we saw on a day-to-day basis. If you're in the Bible Belt, if I'm coming out of, Nashville, that area, you don't really interact with Muslims in the 2010s, the 2000s. It's just something you don't really think about. You see a news story, you don't think about it. When it starts to come into your city, then you think about it. You begin to notice it. And, Tennessee, we see Muslims now. We see mosques being built now. So I was just so anti-neocon that I kind of just default thought, oh, that's just a bunch of bullshit, when that's only half of the story. So what I did was, going back to, say, when the whole blood sports era was first starting to kick off and we were doing these debates. Well, some of my next debates ended up being back in 2017, 18 with Muslims. And so I decided, okay, I'm gonna have to study and learn this religion because it does seem to be growing. I had a lot of friends in the UK who were reaching out saying, hey, Jay, you got to address Islam because these guys are everywhere. They're pushing it on, Speaker's Corner, Dawas everywhere. So I got into the last 6-7 years of hardcore debating and studying Islam. And now I see what it is. And it's a death cult. It's insane. It's absolutely antithetical to everything Western civilization is built on. And that led me in the last few years to reading in depth into the geopolitical structure of Islam and how it's used as a weapon in terms of, weapons of mass migration type stuff to destroy the West. So I actually went and got, we back in the Bloodsport days, 2016, 17, we would hear about the Kalergi plan, that kind of stuff. Well, I went and got Kalergi's books because I wanted to read and see what he actually said. And sure enough, that's what he says, right? He says, we're going to have a future Europe that is under Jewish supremacy. That's what Kalergi plan is really about. In Carol Quigley's books, he says that the Kalergi plan was accepted by the Royal Society, along with Lord Lionel Curtis's plan for kind of a weak ass, Western civilization transitioning into some gay socialism. So that's the future I think that they planned out, and that's what we're beginning to see in the U.S. And probably the thing that really, I'll close with this part, let you talk. The thing that really woke me up to it was not just the debates with the Muslims, but we took a trip, my wife and I, last year we drove to California and back, and we drove to Vegas and back to the Bible Belt. And for the first time, I had seen mosques being built. I mean, even to the point of seeing mosques, excuse me, on Indian reservations. So I started reading on this. Well, it turns out Saudi Arabia has put billions of dollars the last couple of decades into building mosques all across the U.S. Now here in Florida, I drive down the road, I see giant Islamic centers and mosques being built. So that will wake you up.
That's incredible, because for us in Europe, we just don't associate America with these same problems that we've got here.
Oh, it's here now.
This specific one. We tend to think that America is somehow insulated. It's got other problems with
No,
diversity, but not this
you
one.
nailed it. By the way, the last couple of years, it's just exploded. And by the way, you're absolutely right. Not just Islam, also with the Indians, and that's actually why the first episode of the Sam Hyde show that we wrote was the one that went super viral, Dear Elon, about the H-1B India stuff. And for anybody that wants a just masterful, I think, critique, it wasn't just me, it was a bunch of people that wrote on that episode. But if you want a masterful critique of this whole nonsense, go watch episode 1 of the Sam Hyde show.
Yeah. Well, there's a whole, see, that's the whole thing as well, that Sam Hyde has sort of come into his own he was obviously always a comedian, and there was a certain attitude there. But I think in the wake of the Irina Zarutska killing, it's like everyone is coalescing. That's the point. Because I don't want to focus too much on Sam Hyde, but he's just one example of this, where there seems to be a general coalescence. Especially, I mean, how would you say the death of Charlie, or the murder of Charlie Kirk, has affected things in America like this? Do you think it's driven people apart, or do you think it's triggered a sort of catalyzed coming together?
It's a good question. I think, whatever one thinks about what happened, I certainly have my questions about it. I don't know exactly what happened, but I think for most people, it's viewed as a leftist thing, right? So it was a leftist sort of trans attack. That's most people's perception of it, regardless of what you think. The FBI stories that don't make sense or whatever, but it definitely catalyzed and woke a lot of people up to the realities of what I think probably a lot of people in our sphere, you and I, we knew back in 2016, 2017 that the left was not rational, not reasonable. You can't have a civil discussion with them. I remember very vividly when people were, having college events. Gavin McInnes is having events celebrating Trump being elected back in 2016. And Antifa and the leftists responded by hitting people with bike locks. It's like, okay, this is the point now, as Stefan Molyneux, I think, even said, like, we can't be reasonable anymore. These are not rational people. You can't have civil discourse. So that was a sea change. And I think a lot of people who opposed our dissident right type views back then, they now see post Charlie Kirk that, oh, wait a minute, actually the left is insane. They're demonically possessed. You can't reason with them. They will resort to this. And even if the Charlie Kirk thing was some big super psyop, like, it's still the case that the left is insane, and that has mobilized people, I think, to wake up to that. So people are it's interesting because the matrix is now actually really cracking. People are really beginning to understand. Especially you see this with, Fuentes on Tucker, Fuentes debating Piers Morgan. You're beginning to see this now at a much broader, wider scale than ever before. And definitely the Kirk assassination factors into that, regardless of whatever social media people are, turning it into sort of a soap opera. What that will result in, though, I don't know. I can't really gauge yet, like, where is the right going to be able to go with this? What are we actually going to be able to do post Trump? I mean, there's a lot of questions about Vance. You know what I mean? So the awakening is real. I mean, when you go out to events, we had a live event not too long ago, and we had hundreds of people come, right? And I'm just like, last year it was 50. This year we had 200. I spoke at a conference before that before the year before had 100 people. This year had 200 people. I expect that these types of events and speaking engagements and I'm talking about everything on the right, like, it's just going to keep exploding, and people are getting tired of the boomer con, right? They're sick of it. That's the key thing that's happening, is the Matt Walsh Daily Israeli Wire right wing is collapsing. That's the big thing.
Well, I mean, yeah, Ben Shapiro has had a terrible 2025.
Exactly.
I think we can all agree on that.
All right.
But I think the key point about Charlie Kirk's death is it doesn't actually, who did it and who's responsible for it is actually entirely separate from the fallout, where where ordinary leftists, and I remember a bunch of lies about that as well, where they were trying to blame it on right wingers and all of that. But that's incidental. The key thing is that whoever did it, the left celebrated it. And I think it was really ghoulish and sick.
People saw the ghoulish nature of the left.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, it also means that if they would celebrate his death, they would celebrate yours and mine for sure. So everyone, all of us who are in some ways further to the right than Charlie Kirk was, all of us would be, our deaths would elicit cheers and laughter from people who know nothing about us, because they don't even know Charlie Kirk. I mean, they get him wrong all the time as well, all the myths that they spread about him,
Right.
and the stuff they believe about him. So there's a sort of hysteria, but the key thing is that they're hateful, um, and that they hate us, and that they're not interested in debate.
Yes.
That's the thing. It's like that. I wonder how long this can last. I wonder how long this will this just be a mini phase until a lot of leftists realize we have become the bad guys. We're the bad guys now, and wait and snap out of it, or will they continue? Will they, power on with this attitude that basically we've got to kill everyone who disagrees with us?
My concern is that they probably are looking to the establishment to ramp up, more of this, more of the color revolution style stuff, where they pick out the pressure points in any society and push those pressure points. For example, in the Ukraine, it's Russia versus the sort of old line, neo type groups, and you push that pressure point to cause the division there. In America, of course, the classic line of division is racial issues, civil war, all that kind of stuff. So they really push and love these stories that hype up that black people are being oppressed, that white people are committing all the crime, and it's all just totally made up narratives, totally fictional, but it works to hype up these minority groups. As you know, they're very easy to manipulate. So I think what they're doing is they're pushing these pressure points because they want some kind of right-wing violence and conflict and response to then capitalize on. But the problem is that those narratives post Kirk are going to be very difficult to sell to people. So even if they get the diamond in the rough white guy who gets mad and does right-wing violence, like, it's going to be very difficult to sell to everybody that that's the real plague in America, is the white supremacists that are everywhere. So I would be very cautious, if I was on the right, of being entrapped or being coaxed into some kind of goofy militia type thing or something that right-wingers have a tendency to fall into, unfortunately. But that's what they're going to do, is keep pushing and pushing and pushing to try to provoke something to make the right look bad. The classic example is OKC. In the 80s, late 80s, early 90s, you had this growing. It was goofy, but it was a kind of a conservatism that at least the establishment felt could be a threat. And all it took was one gigantic terror event with right-wing racialists blowing up the Oklahoma City bombing, all of which has all kinds of very sus details and facts about it, because it mobilized the Clinton victory. So political violence is classic for the establishment, for the left, and for the fake right. So I would look for them to push and try to get something like that on a bigger scale, to demonize the right.
The thing is that if there were right-wing violence, what you wouldn't have is the mass response to that of right-wingers celebrating it. Whereas you did get that when Charlie Kirk died.
Good point.
Huge numbers of left-wing people publicly, openly celebrating it and mocking him, and so forth. And so I just don't know if you would be able to make the right look as bad as the left, because you just wouldn't have the same numbers of people gloating and mocking the victims. I mean, I think it was a terrible, again, a PR problem for the left, for ordinary leftists. But I also think it was fascinating that they did it, because it shows that they have no idea what it's like to be censored and oppressed and surveilled. I remember one time hearing about some lefty YouTube channel, and they were complaining very loudly because one of their videos had been taken down. And it was like that. This was about 5 years ago, and it was
Right.
like, so that's your notion of being oppressed.
Yeah.
It's not that you lose everything. It's that one of your videos is taken down, and it showed the sheer asymmetry.
Right.
what they're accustomed to and what we're accustomed to. And I was reminded of that when this whole thing happened after Charlie Kirk's death, where so many left-wingers thought that they were completely safe putting up videos of themselves mocking him and even imitating his, how he died and so. I mean, really grotesque, sick stuff, and they thought they were safe doing that. And I think they were shocked when they discovered that actually they're not safe doing that. They can get fired, for
Right.
example. They can get named and shamed, etc. And I think for a lot of them, that had never happened before, and it had never even been conceivable for them that that would happen. So it was a real shock. And a lot of people on our side celebrated that, and these people getting fired, and said, screw them. They celebrated it when the same happened to us for much less. So yeah, let them get fired, let them get censored, let them get deplatformed, get defunded, and so on. I don't know what to think about that. On the one hand, yeah, I want them to suffer for mocking a decent man's death, but at the same time, we don't want to fall into this mentality of approving of all types of censorship and just everyone gets silenced, because that's obviously not going to work in anyone's favor.
Yeah, it's definitely a tightrope to walk there because, you could fall on either side of that. I think that a healthy society, as you know, I mean, it has to shame certain activities and certain types of people. And that requires some kind of moral framework, some kind of a paradigm that gives us some kind of basis for, for shaming and doing that kind of activism. And I think what's happened is just simply that people on the right have finally figured out in mass that they're not going to play fair. The left doesn't debate. They're not civil anymore. Whenever that was 10, 20 years ago, well, that's gone. Now it's they see it as, like Sam Hyde said in the viral clip from the Arena video, they hate you and they want you dead. So you're not going to, reason with somebody like that. You're not going to have a rational discourse with serial killers, right? Or Jeffrey Dahmer or something like that. It's not going to work. So people, I think, are just resorting to, pragmatism, to the next phase. And that's why I think that as this continues, I don't see how it won't. I'm not calling for violence, but I'm saying I don't see how it won't continue to up the ante, because in my view, like evil, and I think the left is objectively now fully openly evil, and they're mask off. Like they can't stop. They're sort of they're not in their own right mind. They don't have self-control. So they're actually kind of impelled by the passions and the extremes that dominate them. So they will be necessarily continuing to up the ante, continue to triple down, quadruple down, and get more and more extreme. And we've just seen that with the trans movement, right? The trans movement went from very obscure to now there's Trantifa, right? Like they're getting more and more extreme, and they can't.
That's a whole thing. That it occurred to me that if you tell young people, if you fracture their identity when it's still forming, and you pump them full of chemicals, and you tell them that mainstream society hates them and is against them, you're going to get a very large number of deranged people. It's like a recipe. You couldn't come up with a better recipe for deranged people. So if they do start, killing people, it's not going to be any kind of surprise.
Well, they've already started killing people. I mean, we've had multiple, mass. Go ahead. Are you there?
Yeah. I'm forgetting about that. It's already happened. I was thinking about the Charlie Kirk killer, but I think he was in a relationship with a transgender. But yeah, there have been others, indeed, over the last few years, and it's not in the slightest bit surprising. It's like someone would, if you wanted to create a client group who will commit violence, this is what you would do. It's quite remarkable.
Transassassinations.
Yeah, exactly. I guess it's what this points to is that if the left are going hysterical and fundamentalist, are they going to be dropped by the establishment that stewarded them and financed them? That seems to have happened to some extent. And BLM, the rainbow stuff seems to be falling by the wayside. do you think that's going to happen, or do you think that they'll be, rejuvenated in the next in the run up to the next presidential election?
Again, I can't. I mean, I just can't see them doing anything other than continuing to double down, triple down, and go even further. Like, the reason that there's not as much open support is just because it's gotten so unpopular post Charlie Kirk to support that stuff. But I can't see how the more radical wings of the Democratic Party with Ilhan Omar or the AOCs or the Bernie Sanders, like, I can't see them ever like backing off of their positions, because they are, they're becoming, I think, the new face of the Democratic Party, which is, just going to be full on Marxist, I think. So I mean, I think they're going to wait until people kind of have forgotten some of the Charlie Kirk stuff, and then they'll just go right back to, business as usual.
That's what I was getting to. Is it seems that America is balkanizing, they're polarizing politically, where the right are, well, the left are going nuts, and the right are realizing that the left are going nuts, and that the left are never going to give you normality back. You're never going to have it back. Whether it's the 50s or even the 70s or even the 90s, the left abhor that. They see it as a time of oppression,
and the normie right are worthless. That's another thing that people are waking up to, is that these fake ass, Daily Wire style people have been the real source of the problem, because we've just been given this fake right wing for so long, and people are finally waking up to this, through Tucker and other people, pushing the point about, like, this neoconservative Israel worship stuff is not gotten us anywhere. It's a huge problem. So that's
absolutely that's a huge thing as well, because it frees the right from shackles that have kept it back for decades and decades, since the Second World War, really. So that's a big thing as well, and that means that the right are also, I'm not going to say going hysterical like the left, but are strengthening. And I think that's only going to continue. And obviously the rise of Nick Fuentes, especially this new thing with Piers Morgan, I think symbolizes that. It seems like the young, the Zoomers are a very polarized generation. They're either insane, left wing, whatever, or they're let's say fascists as a jokey catch-all term,
right?
And I don't know. See, what I'm wondering about is, how long can American society continue like this? Or is it going to have to balkanize? Are you going to have states that are just left-wing havens, and states that are conservative? For how long? Especially because they seem to hate each other. Especially the left seem to utterly hate the right. For how long can that continue? And I'm not asking you because obviously you don't know, but it's just something.
Well, I think they already foresaw that, because they were very perceptive to, for example, begin to flood Tennessee and Florida with Muslims, Somalians. Texas has been flooded with Indians, especially places like Dallas. So I think the left was cunning and perceptive enough for decades to understand that the real problem would be, mid-America and Bible Belt. So flood that with just infinity Muslims and infinity, Indians. That's what we've seen, especially in the last couple of years. Biden had this whole thing of telling all the Latin South American people to Central American people, flood the border when I get elected. And we saw the fruits of that. Millions and tens of millions of illegals. Trump, to whatever degree, is perhaps trying to deport some of these people. I don't know. It's hard to tell what's real and what's fake with these claims of deportations, but it is real. Like, all the stuff that you're seeing is very real. The cities have definitely changed, but you're absolutely right that they've already pre-war gamed that Mid-America and the Bible Belt will be the place that would be sort of havens from this stuff. And I actually think that part of the reason that, when we had COVID, the lockdowns were so ridiculous in California and New York, that actually made a lot of people flee to mid-America and to Tennessee and Florida and Texas especially. But unfortunately, a lot of those places are now the big cities in the Bible Belt in the South and Texas. They're becoming blue. So there's even nefarious sort of like machinations even in all that, because you have places like Dallas, Austin, they're going to be like full on Democrat soon. So they'll be fully blue. Even the southern cities states are going to be battlegrounds for this kind of stuff. I mean, even that movie Civil War, which is total, British establishment propaganda, in a way it's kind of accurate, because they had like breakaway states. They had, this sort of fragmentation of the U.S., middle America, right, splitting off from DC or whatever. That's probably where it's going to go.
Yeah, of course, it's easy to forget that California used to be a Republican state, and that just seems unthinkable now. I believe it was the 80s, Reagan's amnesty, and ever since then, it's impossible that will ever be a Republican state again, because demographics dictate this stuff. But the other thing that they dictate is how strong the native, let's say the whites, can be, because if you're living with foreign people and you have relatives who've married them and so forth, that compromises everything. You can't have the same strength of will that you would have had without these circumstances. So I think you can weaken a people just by the act of putting foreigners into their midst, into their country, and it destroys solidarity.
Absolutely.
Just in and of itself.
Demographic warfare is so insidious in that way, because it's actually a form of mild genocide to get rid of people groups by design. But it's under the cloak of, oh, you don't care about other people, and how evil are you to have borders, and stuff that the papacy bitches about every day, like, oh, invite all the Muslims into Europe. Leo just said this like 2 or 3 days ago. Meanwhile, he's sitting in this giant walled up palace of a city state known as the Vatican. It's like, it's so insidious, and so just the fake humanitarian concern, I think, is the most irritating aspect of that, because these people have absolutely no concern for these third world people, and yet the insidious mild genocide that they promote is cloaked with humanitarian. It's just so fake and gay, dude.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I actually wrote a series of essays this year about the Great Replacement, and one of the points I made in that is how you just put them into an area, and then that will change the area, and it, as you say, insidious, but also over time, so that initially it's just a spice, it's just a novelty, a rarity, but then suddenly, almost overnight, it switches, and they're there, and they're there in big numbers, and they're having kids and all the rest of it, and bringing their families over, and suddenly that place has changed forever. And I just cannot believe that this happened by accident. It's amazing to me that there are still people who think this happened by accident.
No, I mean, I remember vividly. It's maybe 2012, 2016. There was an article. It was either in the Guardian or the Telegraph, with the banker Peter Sutherland, the European banker, saying that replacement migration is explicitly to get rid of the European nation states and people. He was basically reaffirming what Kalergi says, century ago in his practical idealism, basically saying the exact same thing. Then we get the UN replacement migration document that says the exact same thing. So this stuff starts to come out. Mask off. Everybody's getting mask off. That's 2025 was everybody mask off, including, I mean, even Daniel Hakikachu, right? That debate he did with our friend Andrew a couple weeks ago. The whole debate's about IQ of Islamic nations being like 60 or whatever and under. And he's like, okay, yeah, fine. We're all a bunch of low IQ, but we're going to come in and destroy your country with our swords. And who cares if you like it or not? So it's mask off.
Absolutely. And there was that guy who just put a video out about a week ago, an American, I think he's of Pakistan descent. I can't remember his name now, but he said that basically you shouldn't have you let us in, and that's it. And now we're here in such big numbers. Is that the man you're talking about? I don't think his.
Brother, you are racist.
Yeah,
Brother,
I think it
why are you
began with
racist to
W.
me? Brother, give me your socialisms. Give me your EBT
Yes,
cards. Brother, why are you
yeah,
racist? Give me.
It's like, wait a minute.
yes,
So colonization is bad, but when you colonize us, it's good. So it's just like everybody's figured out. The other thing that's great too, in 2025, I would say you could argue that Americans have begun to not care about being called racist. That's a huge break in the matrix, you could say.
yeah, definitely. To get to that, you mentioned earlier the boomer matrix. Um, I think you probably are familiar with Academic Agent and his concept of boomer truth. Yeah,
Yes, we
is
did
that what
we
you
did a
mean
great
by boomer?
podcast
I
a
mean,
couple of years ago.
how would
Yeah.
how would you define that the boomer matrix, as you call it?
I can't remember if it was him or someone else had a great video on Spielberg films. And basically, like Spielberg films are the best examples of the installing, the downloading of the boomer code into the boomer mindset. And I know this well because some of the first internet content that I was putting out many, many years ago, around 2012, was me just sort of blogging and writing essays critiquing boomerdom. Because I'd had so many debates throughout the 2000s with, boomer relatives and the coworkers or whatever. I was just noticing these weird patterns of, inability to accept any sort of criticism about their worldview, total inability to question any mainstream narrative on, big pharma, 9/11, high profile events. Like there's nothing that the establishment can do wrong. But I think people really began to see the boomer matrix during COVID, because the boomers were some of the most extreme COVIDians when it came to not just the enforcement of all the ridiculous, nonsensical regulations, but the worship of doctors, the worship of big pharma. And there was some crack in the code that I think broke so many boomer minds and people's perception of understanding the boomer worldview being ridiculous. That cracked during COVID because these people who were worshiping big pharma and doctors could not process that this establishment was a giant corporate psyop scam. And so that just cracked their mind. And then after that, you got just boomer after boomer just sort of being savaged in terms of Tucker Carlson debating Ted Cruz. Classic. I mean, Ted Cruz might even technically be boomer, but he's got the boomer mindset, right? And then they're here debating Israel, and Ted Cruz just collapses, right? And I'm probably thinking of there's probably other big confrontation debates that happened in 2025 that I think cracked the boomer code. Nick just had that debate with Piers the other day. That's another one. I mean, there's just so many things that have happened in 2025 to crack the boomer code, the mind matrix that that old neocon progressive Spielberg era sentimentalism is gone.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that you mentioned COVID, because I think what happened there was this well, first of all, as you say, the trust of and worship of doctors, and the worship of science.
Yeah.
Trust the science at any cost. I mean, no matter how ridiculous it becomes.
Yes.
But also the obsession with safety over everything else.
Cowardice, which shows the cowardice of that
yeah,
group.
It's interesting because it seems like cause and effect. When you look at 2020 and 2025, it seems like 2020 set up a load of crap, and now there's a springback effect happening now. But yeah, the obsession with safety, I think, as you say, that a sort of peak moment of the boomer mentality, where you don't really believe in anything. You don't believe in God, nation, race, religion, whatever, but you believe in material prosperity and safety. Well, that takes you to the world that we experienced in COVID, plus all the woke stuff, like BLM and all that. But that's a huge part of it, is this obsession with just the material. Well, it's not a good world to live in. We all suffered it for several years, and it was absolutely awful. And I think so that kind of discredited that generation in a certain way, because a lot of them were at the top of it and in charge of it and the most fervent about it.
Right.
I think a lot of people developed a certain contempt for them then, which is a shame, but it is the end result of their mentality. I mean, they did enormous damage to our countries, so that they supposedly so as to ensure their lifespans. And as I say, I don't think even that worked really.
No, I mean that's a great. Yeah, you're spot on. I mean, I couldn't have stated it better. You're way more eloquent and well chosen with your words than I am. I tend to ramble, but I think you nailed it.
Oh no, don't worry. I haven't. I've been writing a lot this year, so a lot of stuff is in my head. Yeah, but is there anything else that you'd want to say about the boomer matrix, just to define it in people's minds, so that we've sort of got that?
I think you nailed it there. That the obsession with mud GDP and the only values really that boomers felt were worth fighting for were just sort of these fossilized, irrelevant, negative liberties of freedom. I mean, what is it? People nowadays, we kind of know, like, especially under a bunch of like tyranny, the boomer whole ethos of the Cold War of, oh, we got to fight for our freedoms and whatever nonsense, empty slogans. That's all gone. Because we were under this weird corporate oppression of masks and regulations, and at the same time, this is all for our freedoms. And it's like, what does that even mean? Oh, well, ultimately, it's just the most intense forms of safety. So, my freedoms ends up being nanny state, and the contradiction was so powerful that it collapsed. So that's where we're at. And that's what people saw, was just this empty, materialism, GDP, freedom, Coomer mindset. We were there critiquing the whole classical liberal libertarian ethos, you, me, everybody else in the dissident right, back 2016, 17. I think now we've begun to see 10 years later, the actual beginning of the collapse of the libertarian Enlightenment ethos.
Definitely, and I think that's epitomized by we mentioned Ben Shapiro earlier.
Yep.
He
and
made
Peterson,
a statement.
and Peterson's decline in popularity as well.
Oh, indeed. I hadn't even thought of him, which is significant because I used to rant about him. But Shapiro's statement earlier, about a month ago, about maybe you shouldn't be able to live where you grew up. That makes sense. I mean, that in his mentality, in his mindset, that makes sense. Yeah, but if you can't afford it, then fuck you. You've got to live. You've got to move. But I think
does that apply to Eretz Israel? By the way, does that apply to?
Yeah, exactly. But I think unwittingly he sort of exposed the whole thing there, because everyone wants, everyone has an attachment to the place they grew up in.
Yeah,
and there's nothing wrong with that. And a society which works against that is clearly, by definition, a bad society, which is bad to its own people.
Yeah, and I'm not a
Peterson. That's what his mentality leads to. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, and I'm not a Peterson hater. I've always been had the same criticism from 10 years ago of the classical liberal Enlightenment presuppositions. I like a lot of what Peterson says. I don't really like much of what Ben Shapiro says, but but I mean, it's the same. Yeah, it's the same criticism for the last 10 years, and it is actually good. It's nice to see even Peterson, come to think of it, before he had his most recent health decline. Some of the last podcasts that he was doing with Pajot and people, he was actually doing podcasts on the death of the Enlightenment worldview. So, maybe if he comes back healthy, he can begin to move more in our direction. We'll see.
Well, I hope he does. I mean, I don't wish the guy any harm, and I don't think he's a bad guy. I just think he's deeply compromised, and the drugs, whatever they did to him, I think that damaged him as well. But I think that he was compromised by going too far. But the death of the Enlightenment, that is what we're talking about here. It's this sense that a whole way of looking at the world is falling away now, and it has to, because it's killing us. And his preaching, Jordan Peterson, what he used to preach, individualism and all of that, and the scourge, what was it, the identity politics pathology,
Yes.
all of that just seems a million miles away now. I don't think he would get an audience talking about that stuff nowadays.
No.
And it's only 5 years, but a lot has changed.
Exactly.
Because I think Americans especially can see that individualism is killing them. And obviously it's a spectrum and all that, but you can have too much of it. And when it gets to the point where you're driven out of your hometown so that Indians who are more economically viable can be there instead, yeah, that's probably too much. At that point, it's probably gone too far.
It's sad that it had to get to that when you and I and others, back in 2015, 2016, were already warning and saying that that would be the end result. When you make everybody into interchangeable economic units, which is exactly what the Sam Hyde episode 1 was arguing, the end result is you're basically in a we used to have this thing in America called the company town. And a company town is where a corporation owns the town and all the products and all the services. So you're basically a slave, but you're free because you can move to another town. All right. So, but a company owns everything in the town, from the water to the general store to the clothing store, whatever. So if it's going to be in a company store that eventually ends up being run by Infinity Indians, like, what did my freedoms and all the stuff that we fought for actually gain us?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is what's rapidly coming into focus for a lot of people. I mean, I don't know exactly why. If you were to list the reasons why, I don't know what you would say, but it's definitely happening, and I think it's very interesting to see it happening. I think it's it's a really great development. And especially with America, because America has always had this, well, at least from over here, it's always had this reputation of believing in individualism, believing in freedom and capitalism and so on. And so it's interesting that the reaction against that is happening in America, and that it's happening so organically. It's not top down. It's in the American people themselves. I think they're realizing that this stuff, these ideas, are leading to their extinction.
Yeah,
So,
internal contradictions within these systems eventually become so extreme that they collapse the system. So like we were saying with like the boomer contradictions, like safety, security, freedom end up in a nanny state, and that contradiction becomes so powerful that people just sort of actually start. I think they kind of start going crazy. A lot of boomers kind of started going crazy during the COOF. And it's the same with the overall Enlightenment individualist ethos, right? The atomized individual. And I have criticisms of Dugan, but I think Dugan made this point even like 10 years ago. He said something like, if you focus everything down to the individual as just this sort of atomized unit, eventually what happens is that gets divided too, and there ends up being this sort of split in the individual between further and further divisions. It's almost like a disintegration, like everybody achieving a kind of MPDDID, like just total psychosis at some point. That's what I think we see with even some of these trans people, is like the radical hyper individualism and the notion of my identity is really the same as a consumer product. So I can today, if I want to purchase the identity of, being a woman, I can do that. And tomorrow I can be a man again. And the next day I can identify as a Black person, right? Like Rachel Dolezal. That notion that there's no more identity that's metaphysically a part of me or in me or inherent to me. It's now purely an external rational choice or product is the end result of atomized individual. And that's exactly why it ultimately is destructive. And people are beginning to come in confrontation with that fundamental contradiction, and you either reject it or you go crazy.
And one of the contradictions is that this idea that, well, you can choose your identity as like a consumer product, but everyone else has to take your choice very seriously.
Exactly.
So you can choose to be a woman this week, but everyone's got to believe that you really are a woman. And if any, etc., or you could say whatever, gender fluid, non-binary. Everyone else has to believe you totally about this. Why? It's ridiculous. It's completely stupid. And identity isn't something that you can just, I mean, yeah, it's something that you make over your lifetime, sure, but it is also sort of baked in. And you definitely can't just pick and choose. And I
Well,
don't think you can define it by surgical interventions either.
no.
I mean, it's absurd.
No, it ties into. I remember when we were doing some of my global elite book analyses. One of those that's overlooked. I remember reading Terence McKenna, and he's a great figurehead for the boomer mindset, because I want to say it's in Food of the Gods, but he has a section that's very telling. It's very enlightening, where he talks about magical thinking, and he says basically that one of the things that helped the '60s counterculture movement propel and become popular was this idea that you could, through magical thinking, construct your reality. And I don't know if he knew what he was hitting on, but he was basically pointing to the whole notion of identities and persons and cultures all being social constructs. And that's what's dominated, academia in the West for decades. When I was in academia, that's what was taught. Everything's a social construct, reality is a social construct, race is a social construct, gender, social, everything's a social construct. And so that just leads to this notion of magical thinking that I can just sort of create my reality by whatever I want to be the case, or whatever I purchase, or whatever external surgeries I have, or whatever. It's an insane delusion, but it's such a powerful delusion that, again, people either reject it or they go crazy, because those delusions, the more that you buy into them, the more you double down, you really end up being divided against yourself. And I think that's it's a fundamental kind of spiritual problem that the West is grappling with. But yeah, so it's exactly what it's also the same. It's the same as reductionist materialist attitudes, that when I reduce what a person is, or what meaning is, or what gender is, or whatever, when I reduce those things to purely external material factors, then they can be interchanged with other material factors. So in other words, I'm not a man, I'm just a social construct that if I'm a woman, if I put on a plastic penis, I've now become a man, because I've just exchanged the sort of material objects that make a thing what it is. But this is to totally ignore the transcendental spiritual realities that do exist, that make people what they are, individuals what they are, cultures what they are, families what they are. What Spengler called the soul of a people. That's a real thing. But materialism has to deny that. And the more it denies it, the more it goes into this reductionist idea that leads to the magical thinking that Terence McKenna was a proponent of.
See, I actually read Food of the Gods, and there was, I think, the Archaic Revival, so an essay collection. I think it was True Hallucinations that I didn't. There was one of his books that I didn't get around to, but in my early adulthood, I was really into all of that stuff, and I liked Terence McKenna. And I often wonder, he died, I think, 2001. I often wonder, what would he think now of the left today? Because I remember once hearing there were MP3s of his lectures going around, and I remember in one of those, he was mocking some academic research that they'd spent a fortune to find out that men are more promiscuous than women. That was the conclusion at the end of it. And he was mocking this because it's an obvious fact. Well, in 2025, what academic could say that? Because you can't even say what a woman is or what a man is. So
exactly.
So he would be even more at odds with things now, is my point. If he was slightly, he'd be very at odds with it now. I think as much as he was a boomer, he also, like the boomers are, they are still off the 60s. They still think in terms of men and women, despite their fancy ideas. They are still off that. They come from that time.
Right.
So I wonder to what extent would he go along with this stuff. I think he probably would, to some extent.
Probably would. Yeah. I mean, he was such a pioneer of most of the boomer, dogmas. However, there are some areas where I think he would disagree. Like he did have good critiques of mass media, of television and mind control, through television. So, So I think like a lot of leftists or left sort of counterculture people, every now and then they'll hit on good points. You know what I mean? They'll have a good critique here and there. The problem is that they just don't have any grounding or any paradigm from which to posit anything better.
Yeah, they're still stuck in that mindset, so they have to come up with explanations and recommendations from that mindset, regardless of what it is they're critiquing.
And usually their
It's a
answer is
problem.
just more liberalism, more of the problem.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So let's get on to the matter of Trump, just as a final thing before I go to the super chats. And people, if you do want to post any questions for Jay, now would be the time. But Trump and disappointment, that was a note that I made at the start of this conversation because he mentioned it. Do you think that to me, it's very confusing because he seems to be slavish to Israel, but not so much that he'll go to war for them, but he will cover the Epstein stuff. He'll cover up the Epstein stuff. It's I can't really make sense of it because he also criticizes Benjamin Netanyahu. He said they don't know what the fuck they're doing. There was that quote from him. What is your perception of Trump? Well, Trump and Israel first.
Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest, prior to maybe the Trump Israel issue, and which was always kind of there. There was also this, the warp speed stuff. That was probably the biggest fail on the part of Trump the first go around. And then the next go around, probably the biggest fail would be Epstein and the relationship to Israel. I've heard a lot of different analyses and theories on this. Some people just kind of say, look, the American bureaucratic governmental structure is so, intertwined with AIPAC and the Israeli power bloc that you can't get it out. You know what I mean? So it's almost like, what can Trump really do? I'm not making excuses because, I learned about the sort of Israeli stuff, AIPAC, and the Zionist influence in the American government back in 2005. I think I started reading books on that. So I've known about that for a long time. And I think, for me, I just kind of already assumed, even in 2016, maybe Trump can do some good things, but probably not a lot. You know what I mean? It's almost like, hopefully I had a pretty realistic assessment. I knew right away that Russiagate was fake, but I just didn't have this euphoria that I thought, Trump's going to fix everything or I was pro Trump with reservations precisely because of these types of things. So, anytime I see good things happening, that's great. I hope they really are deporting people. I mean, if our country is going to survive, they have to. There's just no other way around it. I think that some of the actions that he did with trying to send troops into cities, all that's good and necessary because it doesn't even matter anymore about the optics of it's a police state. No, I mean, it's not a police state when you're literally trying to save the country from collapse and from, it's an invasion. So it's not police state to save the country from an invading force. That's just emergency measures.
Well, exactly. Remember the emergency powers during COVID.
Exactly. Right. Yeah.
They can do it then.
Great point. Yeah. If we're going to say emergency powers are vindicated and justified, well, this would be one case, way more sensible than the COVID nonsense.
Yeah.
So I think again, there's just limited things that a president can do, and I've just always kind of been like, I don't have very high expectations. So if Trump does anything good, I'm happy. With Israel, though, it's just a sad state of affairs to be so wrapped up with, trying to placate this nation state that has only contempt for America and Christians anyway. Netanyahu says that the book, I'm sure you saw that clip the other day where they're like, what book are you reading? He's like, I'm reading Barry Strauss's book on how to not lose to Rome again, meaning the West, to Christianity. So, very mask off moment, right? Everybody's mask off now. Now that everybody's mask off, what's the point of placating and, bowing to Israel anymore? It doesn't make any sense. So this is something I think that going forward is going to be very difficult to maintain over time support from a base that is figuring out the double standards, the hypocrisy, the decades of Israel spying on the U.S., compromising people in the U.S., Jonathan Pollard type stuff. Ben Shapiro can sit there and say that you need to, accept these people, but and not worry about having a homeland. But Israel deserves a homeland. It's just all of the hypocrisy and the double standard is out there, and Trump is a perfect example of the boomer mind control matrix, because he's on the edge of both. Like he's on the side of the boomer Ziocon, matrix some of the time, and then other times he's like the figure that's almost kind of breaking the boomer Ziocon matrix. So,
yeah,
I just think that boomers can only go so far. You know what I mean? They can only get to this, and then they just fall back into it.
Yeah, this is why I said that it's confusing. It's a messy. It's difficult to really understand. Well, at least for me. Maybe other people listening to this are shaking their heads, but to me, it's kind of difficult to work out what Trump is really all about. I'm not sure.
I think what people have been trying to figure out since 2016. Like what's Trump?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know.
Yeah,
but,
indeed. Well, there were some super chats. Okay. Open Borders has asked, what is your view on Israel and Palestine? I think you've covered that, but if there's anything you'd like to add to that, about Israel and Palestine.
Well, I reject the false dialectic of either you're with Israel or you're with Hamas. I reject all of that. I don't care for either one. Critical of both. I do care about Orthodox Christians in Palestine, Orthodox churches, which they are a very small 1-2% minority, but that I do care about. I didn't ever think that Trump would actually achieve peace in the Middle East, or I mean, I just it's a powder keg that was always been there as a powder keg, and I reject both sides of it wholeheartedly. In fact, yesterday's Alex Jones show that I did, the 4th hour, which is on my Twitter, you can watch. I just kind of broke down that Israel and Islam are enemies of Western civilization.
Yeah, and the enemy of your enemy is not necessarily your friend. I think that's something that a lot of people need to understand.
A good way to put it.
Yeah. We don't need to pick a side. I mean, I don't want them coming here. Put it that way. All right. Angarad Celtic said, I knew the 19 was a scam when I saw the TikTok videos of dancing doctors and nurses.
Yeah.
I also read the label on the face masks. Totally useless. Well, indeed. I don't know where she is in America, but so I don't know how bad it was where she was, but certainly in Britain, it was bad. Actually, more in Scotland than in England, from my experience. Obviously, Canada, Australia, New Zealand had it worse. America seems to have been a mixed, quite a patchwork in terms of the restrictions. But yes, if you wanted a big giveaway, the TikTok videos were there from the start. I mean, the dance routines with nurses. I mean, it was just surreal.
Yeah.
For a start, they're wasting time on the job, but second, it's just the indignity of it, the cheap, the soullessness of it.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be doing that when people are supposedly dying all around you. You should not be filming yourself for the internet doing a dance routine. It's just bad. It's just bad taste, and it gave the lie to the whole thing. 2020 was just surreal, and as I've said many times, I don't think we'll ever see a year quite like 2020 again in our lifetimes.
I agree.
Interesting. I guess there are all sorts of things that we could talk more about, especially Terence McKenna. I don't often encounter people who are familiar with Terence McKenna, but he was an influence on me at one point, a long time ago now. But it's I like him. I find him a very likable guy. When you listen to his stuff, even now, I think God, I could have a good time with him, a drink with him.
I'm so glad to hear that from you, Millennial Rose. Hopefully, we can also do some shrooms together and see the Clockwork Elves.
Oh my God. I didn't know that was a secret ability you've got there. That's I
can do a great Terence McKenna.
Yeah, very uncanny. All right, well, this has been good. I think we can probably wrap it up there.
Okay.
All right. So it's been a long time coming. I'm sorry that I haven't invited you on before, but I'm glad that we've done it now.
Absolutely.
So,
great chat.
Yeah, excellent. Well, I'll be back in 40 minutes with Leonardo Joni. But in the meantime, Jay, thank you for appearing on Millennial 2025.
Thank you, man. Have a good day. And Merry Christmas.
All right. Merry Christmas.